Corvus Prime shimmered like a jewel in the void, an artificial moon transformed into the gleaming capital of the Galactic Concord. Its crystalline spires and gravity-defying architecture housed the beating heart of interstellar governance, the Grand Hall of Concordance. Here, representatives from hundreds of member species assembled to debate, negotiate, and shape the destiny of a galaxy that had known relative peace for 7 centuries. Ambassador Illyra Vance stared out from her modest quarters at the cityscape below. Weariness etched lines around her eyes, deepened by months of fruitless diplomacy. As the official voice of the Terrestrial Federation, Earth and its colonies, she had spent the last year fighting an increasingly desperate battle for recognition of a threat the Concord refused to acknowledge. The comms unit on her desk chimed, displaying a message from her aide. "The council session begins in 30 minutes, Ambassador." She didn't reply. What was there to say? This would be her 5th and final appeal for military assistance against the Cthar Swarm, a race of mechanoid insectoids systematically consuming frontier worlds, including several terrestrial colonies. 5 times she had brought evidence: disappearing settlements, ruined ecosystems, refugee testimony, and surveillance footage showing planetary surfaces being converted into hive structures. 5 times she had been denied. Illyra fastened the formal diplomatic sash across her charcoal gray suit and steeled herself for one last attempt at reason. The Grand Hall of Concordance formed a perfect dome, with seats arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. Above, the ceiling was a magnificent recreation of the galaxy, with member worlds highlighted in gentle blue luminescence. Illyra noted with bitter irony that several terrestrial colonies had already vanished from the display, their stars now dark, casualties the Council had chosen to ignore. She took her place among the lower tiers, where newer member species were seated. The whispers and sidelong glances from nearby delegations were not subtle. Humans had only been part of the Concord for 80 years, barely a moment in the reckoning of species who measured their civilizations in millennia. "The final appeal of the Terrestrial Federation will now be heard," announced the automated system. Ambassador Illyra Vance to the central platform. Illyra rose and walked steadily down to the center of the hall, data tablet in hand. Above her loomed the High Council dais, where the 7 founding species sat in elevated magnificence. At its center was Council Chairman Valerius, a Xylosian with iridescent scales and multiple eye stalks that seemed perpetually half-lidded in boredom when addressing human concerns. "Ambassador Vance," Valerius's voice resonated through the chamber. "The Council recognizes your presence, but reminds the Assembly that we have addressed this matter on 4 previous occasions. Your persistence is noted." Illyra activated her presentation one last time. Holographic displays materialized, showing the systematic destruction of New Avalon, a terrestrial agricultural colony. The images were graphic: colonists fleeing, Cthar drones dismantling infrastructure with horrific efficiency, converting organic and inorganic matter alike into raw materials. "Honorable Council," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "What you witness is not an isolated incident, but the leading edge of an existential threat. The Cthar Swarm has consumed 17 worlds in the past standard year, including 5 terrestrial colonies. Our defensive fleets are outmatched. We have lost contact with 3 additional colonies in the past month alone." She zoomed in on footage of the massive Cthar Queen ships that coordinated each planetary assault. "Our analysts project that without intervention, the swarm will breach the Perseus defensive line within 6 months, placing 15 additional populated systems at risk, including 3 belonging to other Concord members." A Miltari representative from the middle tier called out, "Yet you provide no evidence they will advance beyond human territory." Illyra managed to maintain her composure. "The Cthar do not recognize political boundaries. They consume. They expand. They are not a conventional enemy that can be reasoned with or deterred through diplomacy. The Terrestrial Federation formally requests that the Concord commit its combined fleet to—" "Ambassador," interrupted Valerius, not even attempting to hide his disinterest. "We have reviewed your materials and find, once again, insufficient evidence of a comprehensive threat to Concord interests." His eye stalks swiveled to consult a data screen. "The Strategic Assessment Division has determined that committing resources to your border skirmishes would unacceptably weaken our core defensive posture." Border skirmishes? Alara couldn't keep the edge from her voice. 17. Worlds have been completely destroyed. "Frontier worlds," corrected another council member, a Vraxian with a voice like grinding stone. "Underdeveloped territories of minimal strategic value. With millions of inhabitants," Alara countered. "Concord citizens deserving of protection under Article 7 of the Charter." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Alara knew she had struck a nerve by directly citing the Charter's mutual defense clause. But Valerius merely sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. "The High Council has made its determination, Ambassador. The terrestrial request for military intervention is officially denied. We will, however, consider humanitarian assistance for your refugees, provided they are relocated well away from the affected sectors." Alara stood perfectly still as the pronouncement settled over the hall. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. The assembled delegates expected the usual display of human emotion: protests, appeals, perhaps even tears. Many had already prepared to tune out what they considered predictable histrionics. Instead, Alara calmly deactivated her presentation. She collected her data tablet, straightened her diplomatic sash, and looked directly into Valerius's clustered eyes with unwavering intensity. Without a word, she turned her back to the High Council, a shocking breach of protocol, and walked steadily toward the exit. The silence in the grand hall deepened to something profound, something uncomfortable. No delegate walked out while the council was in session. It simply wasn't done. "Ambassador Vance," Valerius called, genuine surprise in his tone. "The session is not concluded." Alara paused at the doorway, but did not turn around. She stood framed in the archway for a long moment, her silhouette rigid with dignity. Then she stepped through and was gone. The silence broke into confused whispers. Representatives from smaller, newer member species exchanged glances of concern tinged with something else. A nascent understanding that something significant had just transpired, though none could quite articulate what it meant. In her private diplomatic vessel, Alara composed a simple, encrypted message to Earth. "The table is barren." The 5-word transmission represented the activation code for a contingency plan developed in secret over the past decade, a plan that President Marcus Thorne had hoped would never be necessary. On Earth, the message arrived during a midnight security briefing. The president's face remained impassive as his communications officer delivered it, but the tension in the room crystallized immediately. "Implement Project Silent Sky," he ordered, his deep voice heavy with the weight of decision. "Full activation, all phases. Effective immediately." Within hours, coded transmissions reached terrestrial fleets across the galaxy. Ships on routine patrol began quiet course changes. Research stations initiated deletion protocols for sensitive data. Manufacturing centers on distant colonies activated production lines that had been built in secret and kept dormant. Humanity had finally accepted that the table they had fought so hard to join had no place for them after all. In the days following Alara's unprecedented exit, rumors swirled through the diplomatic corps of Corvus Prime. Some claimed she had suffered a psychological break under the pressure. Others suggested she had been recalled in disgrace. A few more observant delegates noted that the entire terrestrial diplomatic staff had become strangely quiet, responding to communications with formal precision but volunteering nothing. A week later, the Miltari ambassador approached the terrestrial embassy to discuss a trade agreement renewal, only to find the ornate doors sealed with a simple message: "The Terrestrial Federation has concluded its diplomatic mission to the Concord. All inquiries should be directed to automated services." Similar scenes played out across Concord space. Human diplomatic outposts emptied systematically. Major commercial contracts were terminated with the minimum required notice. Joint research initiatives found their human collaborators suddenly unavailable, leaving behind meticulous documentation but no forwarding contact information. The High Council initially dismissed these developments as a childish tantrum, an emotional response typical of such a young species. Valerius publicly stated that the humans would return to reason once they recognize the futility of isolation. But as weeks stretched into months, a different pattern emerged. Observation posts noted unusual activity in terrestrial space. Massive transport fleets moved between colonies and formations that suggested organized evacuation rather than panic. Concord intelligence vessels attempting to monitor these movements frequently lost track of their targets, as if the human ships simply vanished from sensors. In a closed council session, a Det-Hari intelligence analyst presented findings that generated the first flickers of concern among the founding species. The humans are employing stealth and disruption technologies well beyond what our assessments indicated they possessed, the analyst explained, displaying tracking data that showed ghost signatures and false positives scattered across terrestrial territory. We believe they are conducting a coordinated population movement, but to where, we cannot determine. How can an entire population simply disappear? Demanded a Vraxian counselor. That is the concerning question, the analyst replied. Either our intelligence on their capabilities has been dramatically wrong for decades, or they have been developing technologies in secret that we cannot counter. Chairman Valerius dismissed these concerns publicly, but privately authorized increased surveillance of terrestrial space. Those surveillance vessels returned with troubling reports. Entire colonial populations had vanished, leaving behind only automated systems programmed to respond to basic inquiries. Meanwhile, the Cthar swarm continued its advance, consuming one frontier world after another. With terrestrial forces no longer engaging them, the swarm's progress accelerated. Smaller Concord member species with territories near the expansion zone began to petition the Council for protection, citing the same charter provisions that Alera had invoked. Valerius found himself echoing the same responses he had given the humans. Insufficient evidence of broader threat, strategic prioritization, suggestions of relocation rather than defense. But now, these answers were met with growing unease rather than resigned acceptance. 3 months after Alera's departure, the first major sign of something truly unusual appeared. The colony of New Alexandria, home to over 30 million humans and a major manufacturing center, stopped responding to all communications. Concord monitoring stations detected massive energy surges across the planet's surface before all signals abruptly ceased. When an investigation team arrived, they found the planet intact but completely abandoned. Cities stood empty, power systems hummed on automatic settings, but not a single human remained. More bizarre were the readings from orbital sensors. Where New Alexandria had once radiated the expected energy signature of a developed world, now there existed what scientists could only describe as a fold in space, as if something had reached into reality itself and created a blind spot. The investigation team reported directly to the High Council. It appears the entire human population, along with key infrastructure, has been transported elsewhere through means we cannot explain. The residual energy patterns suggest technology operating on principles outside our current understanding of physics. For the first time, genuine alarm spread through the upper echelons of Concord leadership. As months passed, the pattern repeated. One by one, human colonies went dark, only to be discovered completely evacuated, with the same inexplicable spatial anomalies left behind. The humans weren't fleeing. They were systematically withdrawing according to some predetermined plan, taking their people, technology, and knowledge with them. The most concerning development came when analysts realized that human vessels had disappeared entirely from Concord space. The once ubiquitous terrestrial trading ships, passenger liners, and diplomatic couriers had vanished from shipping lanes. Inquiries to automated terrestrial systems received the same response. The Terrestrial Federation has concluded operations in this sector. This system will remain operational for legacy support purposes only. Chairman Valerius finally convened an emergency session of the High Council 6 months after Alaire's departure. The chamber, once dismissive of human concerns, now hummed with anxious energy. "We face an unprecedented situation," Valerius began, his usual arrogance tempered by genuine concern. "The humans have withdrawn not only their diplomatic presence, but their entire civilization from known space. Our analysts cannot determine where they have gone or how they have accomplished this feat." A military counselor leaned forward. "Could this be related to the Cathar threat they warned us about?" "It seems probable," admitted Valerius reluctantly. "The Cathar have advanced beyond former terrestrial territories and now threaten the Epsilon sector, including several Concord members' colonies." "We should have listened," said a Det-Hari representative bluntly. "The humans were right." "That is not helpful," Valerius snapped. "What matters now is determining whether the human withdrawal represents a threat to the Concord. Their technological capabilities clearly exceed our previous assessments. If they have developed spatial manipulation technology of this magnitude, what else might they have concealed?" The council debate continued for hours, but reached no conclusion. In the absence of information, fear began to fill the void. Species that had coexisted with humans for decades suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew about their quiet, persistent neighbors. Meanwhile, beyond the political chambers, smaller member species watched the Cathar swarms advance with mounting dread. Many had relied on trade relationships with humans or benefited from the buffer zone that terrestrial colonies had provided. With that buffer gone and the Concord seemingly paralyzed by indecision, panic began to spread. Amid the growing chaos, a few individuals made different choices. A small number of humans had elected to remain behind. Those with deep personal connections to other species, researchers unwilling to abandon life's work, or dissidents who disagreed with Project Silent Sky. These individuals became valuable sources of limited information, though most claimed to know nothing about where their species had gone. One such human was Dr. Imani Okafor, a xenobiologist who had spent decades working with the avian species. When questioned by Concord authorities, she offered only this cryptic response: "Humanity gave the Concord every opportunity to recognize that we are all in this together. When you made it clear that some worlds matter more than others, you taught us an important lesson about where we stand. We simply took that lesson to heart." As the Cathar swarm continued its inexorable advance, the absence of humanity grew from a diplomatic curiosity to a looming void. The empty human chair in the Grand Hall of Concordance became a disconcerting symbol, a visible reminder of a presence now conspicuously absent. Some delegates began to refer to it as Vance's rebuke, though never within earshot of the High Council members. A year after humanity's withdrawal began, the Cathar swarm reached the Miltari colony of Varos Prime. The Miltari, having observed the fate of human worlds, had spent months reinforcing the planet's defenses and petitioning the Concord for additional support. The High Council had finally acknowledged the threat and dispatched a defensive fleet, but it proved woefully inadequate. The battle lasted less than a week. Varos Prime fell, its surface transformed into another Cathar processing center. The defeat sent shockwaves through the Concord. For the first time, a world belonging to a founding species had been lost. An emergency session of the full Concord Assembly convened in an atmosphere of panic. The Grand Hall, once a place of measured debate, now rang with accusations and demands for action. Chairman Valerius struggled to maintain order as delegation after delegation took the floor to voice their fear and anger. "We warned you this would happen," shouted the representative from Talus, a small world near the New Front. "The humans try to warn us all, and you dismiss them just as you dismiss us now. The Concord must commit all available resources to contain this threat," insisted the Miltari delegation, their usual composure shattered by the loss of Varos Prime. "We demand the implementation of Emergency Protocol Zeta." Valerius raised his appendages for calm. "The High Council recognizes the gravity of the situation. We are mobilizing all defensive assets, but must caution against panic or hasty action that might." "Hasty," interrupted the Aviant ambassador, Livia, her feathered crest rising in agitation. The humans brought this threat to your attention years ago. How many more worlds must fall while the Council deliberates? The debate deteriorated further until a startling announcement cut through the chaos. The Volscian Federation is withdrawing from the Galactic Concord, effective immediately. Silence crashed over the assembly as Arch-Senator Kellius of the Volscians, one of the 7 founding species, stood impassively at his delegation's platform. We have concluded that the Concord can no longer guarantee our security or serve our interests. Kellius continued into the stunned quiet. We will deploy our resources to protect Volscian territory independently. The proclamation struck like a physical blow. No founding member had ever left the Concord in its 700-year history. Before the assembly could recover, Kellius and the entire Volscian delegation filed out of the hall, explicitly echoing Alara Vance's exit a year earlier. The symbolic power of the moment was lost on no one. In the months that followed, the Concord began to disintegrate. The cooperative structure that had maintained relative peace for centuries buckled under the strain of the Cthar threat and the shock waves of humanity's disappearance. The High Council's authority diminished as individual species redirected resources toward their own defenses rather than the common fleet. Without the coordinating influence of the Concord, defensive efforts became fragmented and ineffective. The Cthar swarm, operating with hive mind efficiency, exploited these divisions masterfully, isolating and consuming world after world. 5 years after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy had transformed. The Concord existed in name only, reduced to a handful of core worlds desperately trying to maintain the illusion of unity. Nearly a quarter of the galaxy had fallen to the Cthar, with millions of refugees fleeing toward the galaxy's core systems, straining resources and goodwill. Among those fleeing was a mixed-species convoy led by Ambassador Livia of the Aviants. Once a respected voice in the Concord, she now commanded a ragtag fleet of civilian vessels carrying the remnants of 6 different species, all evacuated from worlds in the Cthar's path. For weeks they had traveled, staying ahead of pursuing swarm scouts, their resources dwindling and hopes fading. With fuel reserves critically low and no friendly port willing to risk Cthar attention by accepting them, Livia faced the terrible calculus of which ships to sacrifice so others might continue. As she reviewed the increasingly desperate options in her command center, an unidentified signal pierced their communication array. Source unknown, reported her communications officer, a young Dethari whose scales had dulled from stress. It's not Cthar, and not any Concord format I recognize. Let me hear it, Livia commanded. A pattern of pulses filled the command center. Not language, but clearly deliberate. After 3 repetitions, the signal changed to a directional beacon. It's giving us coordinates, the officer said incredulously. Approximately 3 light days from our position. It could be a trap, warned her security chief. Livia's feathers rippled in what passed for a shrug among Aviants. We have few alternatives remaining. Plot a course. Maintain alert status. The convoy altered course toward the mysterious coordinates. 2 days later, long-range sensors detected pursuing Cthar vessels gaining ground, their biomechanical ships moving with terrifying coordination. They'll intercept us before we reach the coordinates, the navigator reported grimly. Livia was about to order the separation of their fastest ships, a desperate measure to ensure at least some survived, when space itself seemed to shudder before them. What appeared could only be described as a tear in reality, a massive, shimmering portal where empty space had been moments before. The phenomenon stretched nearly a kilometer across, its edges pulsing with energy patterns unlike anything in Concord's scientific records. Energy signature matches the residual patterns found on evacuated human worlds, a science officer reported, voice trembling with excitement or fear, perhaps both. Before Livia could respond, the communications array activated again, this time with a clear voice transmission, the first human voice many of them had heard in years. Refugee fleet, this is Gateway Station Horizon. You are cleared for emergency transit. Proceed directly into the rift aperture. Repeat. Proceed immediately. We detect Cthar pursuers on your trajectory. Livia hesitated only briefly. Take us in, she ordered. All ships follow precisely. The lead vessel entered the portal, experiencing momentary sensor disruption before emerging into an astonishing vista, a vast, ordered system of space habitats, orbital platforms, and terraformed planetoids arranged around a central artificial star. The architecture was recognizably human in origin, but incorporated design elements and technologies far beyond anything the Concorde had ever witnessed. As the last refugee ship cleared the portal, it sealed behind them, cutting off the pursuing Cthar with finality. Escort vessels of unfamiliar design, but bearing terrestrial insignia, moved into formation around the refugee fleet, guiding them toward a massive space station. On the station's receiving deck, Livia and her command staff were greeted by a delegation of humans led by an older woman whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Ambassador Livia, the woman said, extending her hand in the human greeting custom. I'm Alara Vance. Welcome to Sanctuary. Livia's feathers bristled in shock. Ambassador Vance? But it's been years. Yes, Alara acknowledged, the lines around her eyes deepening. Much has changed since I left the Grand Hall. Please come with me. Your people need medical attention and rest. Then we have much to discuss. As the refugees were guided to reception centers, Livia and her officers accompanied Alara to an observation deck overlooking the vast complex of Sanctuary. From this vantage, they could see dozens of habitat structures, each apparently housing millions of beings, connected by transit systems that seemed to bend space itself for efficiency. What is this place? Livia asked, unable to conceal her awe. How did you create all this in just 5 years? A tall man with features similar to Alara's joined them. We've had considerably. Longer than 5 years, Ambassador, he said. I'm Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief Architect of Project Silent Sky. I don't understand, Livia admitted. Alara gestured toward the sprawling network of habitats. What you're seeing is the culmination of nearly 30 years of preparation, accelerated when it became clear the Concorde would not act against the Cthar threat. 30 years? But that would mean... Yes, Alara confirmed. The Terrestrial Federation began developing contingency plans almost immediately after joining the Concorde. We recognized early that despite its lofty ideals, the Concorde operated on a tiered system of value. Some worlds, some species, mattered more than others. Dr. Thorne elaborated, Project Silent Sky was originally conceived as a defensive measure, the development of technologies that could protect our more vulnerable colonies if the Concorde failed to honor its mutual defense commitments. Over time, Alara continued, it evolved into something more comprehensive. The portable rift gates were the breakthrough that made everything else possible. They allow us to create stable connections between normal space and pocket dimensions. Essentially, we built our own corner of the galaxy where the Cthar cannot reach us. Livia's gaze swept over the massive construction. And you moved your entire civilization here? Billions of people? Not without difficulty, Alara acknowledged. But when faced with extinction or relocation, humanity chose to adapt. The evacuation took nearly 3 years to complete. Why help us now? Livia asked, the question that had been burning since their rescue. After the Concorde abandoned you? Alara's expression softened. Because despite everything, we haven't abandoned our principles, even if we had to abandon that table. We're still committed to preserving life and cooperation, just on terms that respect all participants equally. In the days that followed, Livia and her people were introduced to Sanctuary in greater detail. They learned that it wasn't a single location, but a network of interconnected pocket dimensions, each housing portions of human civilization along with various research and manufacturing complexes. The technology that created and maintained these spaces operated on principles that Concorde science had barely theorized. Word of the refugee fleet's rescue spread quickly through what remained of Concorde space. Soon, other groups began actively searching for similar rescue beacons. Some found them, Many didn't. The humans, it seemed, were selective about whom they helped, prioritizing civilian refugees over military or political delegations. Former Chairman Valerius, now leading a diminished council overseeing a fragment of the former Concord, attempted to establish official contact with the humans. His diplomatic overtures received a consistent automated response. The Terrestrial Federation acknowledges your communication but does not recognize the authority of the Galactic Concord. Humanitarian assistance requests will be evaluated individually. 6 months after the first rescue, Alara Vance organized a conference at Sanctuary's Central Hub, inviting representatives from all the refugee groups and independent worlds that had established contact with the Terrestrial Federation. The gathering took place in a vast chamber unlike the hierarchical arrangement of the Grand Hall of Concordance. Instead, it featured a level forum where all delegates sat as equals. "We have not brought you here to recreate the Concord," Alara began, addressing the diverse assembly. That structure failed because it was built on implicit inequality and maintained through power rather than cooperation. She activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Nearly a third now consumed by the Cthar, the former Concord fractured into defensive pockets, millions still fleeing the advancing swarm. But we also cannot stand by while life is extinguished and civilizations fall. So we propose something new, the Compact of Mutual Aid and Shared Development. The proposal she outlined was revolutionary in its simplicity, a cooperative alliance based on genuine equality, regardless of technological advancement or population size. Each signatory would retain full sovereignty but commit to shared defense, technological exchange, and sustainable development principles. Most importantly, all decisions would require consensus rather than hierarchical approval. The Terrestrial Federation offers access to our Rift Gate technology for evacuation purposes, as well as defensive capabilities that have proven effective against the Cthar, Alara continued. In exchange, we ask for commitment to the Compact's principles and active participation in the collective good. Debate raged for days. Many species, conditioned by centuries of Concord politics, search for the hidden agenda in humanity's offer. Others questioned whether cooperation was even possible given the diverse needs and historical tensions among the gathered species. Livia emerged as a powerful voice for acceptance. "I have seen both the worst and best of what sentient beings can do," she told the assembly. "I watched the Concord abandon world after world out of self-interest, and I have witnessed humans risk themselves to save strangers. The choice before us is not whether to trust humans, but whether we can learn from past failures to build something better." Gradually, consensus formed. One by one, representatives signaled their willingness to join the Compact. Not all agreed. Some preferred to take their chances alone. Others harbored too much suspicion of human motives. But enough committed to form a viable alternative to the crumbling Concord. In the year that followed, the Compact demonstrated its potential. Combined fleets using terrestrial stealth technology and rift gates conducted surgical strikes against Cthar processing centers, disrupting the swarm's expansion for the first time since humanity's withdrawal. Endangered populations were evacuated to safe havens within Sanctuary or to fortified worlds within normal space. The Cthar advance slowed, then halted in some sectors. For the first time in years, hope flickered in a galaxy that had resigned itself to gradual consumption. The galaxy did not return to the ordered stability of the Concord era. Instead, it entered a more dynamic period, more dangerous in some ways, but also more egalitarian and adaptable. The humans did not dominate the Compact despite their technological advantage, instead serving as facilitators and partners. Their bitter experience with the Concord had taught them the value of genuine cooperation over hierarchical control. 7 years after walking out of the Grand Hall of Concordance, Alara Vance prepared to retire from diplomatic service. Her final address took place in Sanctuary's Forum of Voices, the collaborative chamber that served as the Compact's meeting place. Looking out over the diverse gathering, she saw not the rigid tiers of the Concord, but a vibrant exchange of ideas and perspectives. The Cthar remained a threat, and building trust among former rivals presented daily challenges. But for the first time since leaving that grand table, Elara felt genuine optimism for the future. When I walked away from the Concord, she told the assembly, it was not an act of surrender, but of recognition. Sometimes the tables we've fought so hard to join are not worth sitting at. Sometimes we must have the courage to build new tables, ones with room for all voices. She gestured to the bustling activity of the forum, where working groups of various species collaborated on projects ranging from Cthar defense strategies to refugee resettlement programs. The empty chair I left behind in the Grand Hall was not the end of our story, but the beginning of a better one. By abandoning that table, we made room for countless new ones. As she stepped away from the podium to thunderous approval, Elara caught Livia's eye in the crowd. The Aviant gave a gesture of profound respect. A slight bow with wings crossed that among her people signified recognition of wisdom. The galaxy remained in peril. The fight against the Cthar would continue for generations. The Compact faced internal challenges and external threats daily. But as Elara watched the diverse species working together as genuine equals, she knew that abandoning the table had been worth the risk. Sometimes walking away creates the space necessary for something better to emerge. The galaxy had watched in dread as humanity abandoned the table, only to discover that humanity had been building a better one all along.